On August 5th, the SBU once again delivered a devastating blow to Russia's nuclear aviation.
Damn, that was a hell of a hit, guys.
Russia's absolutely key airbase located in Crimea is currently on fire.
This is fucked, gentlemen.
The entire base exploded.
Everything is burning.
The SBU struck 5 Russian fighter jets at the Saki airfield.
It's really scary.
Blown up airfields, and most importantly, 3 Su-24's nuclear weapon carriers were hit.
This is just fucking insane. It's a shit show. Everything's about to burn down. More than 10 impacts.
A Su-30SM was destroyed and another one was damaged. An aviation munitions depot exploded. The base is engulfed in flames. Evacuation, panic.
The fuel tanks are burning.
Something's burning here too.
Over there in the distance, something's burning as well.
Tens of millions of dollars lost. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure.
Breaking news, friends, August 5th. This is incredible. Ukraine has struck at Russia's nuclear aviation. The SBU carried out the special operation Web 2, and the Saki airfield, a key base for Russian aircraft, has been blown up and is engulfed in flames. The SBU has once again delivered a devastating blow to Russia's nuclear aviation.
No one is allowed near there, not even people. Useless to put it out.
This is an airfield. This isn't a small place.
Drones attacked the Saki airfield in occupied Crimea, Russia's key airbase for operations over the Black Sea. 5 Russian fighter jets were damaged at the Saki airfield, and 1 aircraft was completely destroyed.
It's very frightening.
We've been told to gather our documents. There might be an evacuation. The shells that are loaded into the planes are exploding. It's unclear how they're lying there in such a chaotic manner. In short, they could fly off in any direction.
A Su-30SM was destroyed, another one was damaged, and most importantly, 3 Su-24's nuclear weapon carriers were hit.
A series of explosions in occupied Crimea.
An aviation munitions depot was blown up. The base is engulfed in flames. Evacuation, panic, tens of millions of dollars lost. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure. At the same time, a strike on the Frolova railway station, Arcado, is burning.
Damn, that was a hell of a hit, guys.
Relay cabinets destroyed, traffic halted. Sochi, fire at the oil depot in Adler near the airport. It has ceased operations.
What's burning over there?
The airport?
A drone strike deprived the airport of fuel.
They hit the oil depot, basically. Then again, the garages. Those poor garages got hit too.
Flights are being diverted to alternate airfields. A gas distribution station is on fire in Kurgan. Evacuation is underway. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked gas pipelines in Siberia, the Moscow region, and central Russia, including the route to Central Asia. Airports in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd, and Tambov are closed. At Pulkovo, there are hundreds of flight delays.
The Russian invaders, murderers, are reading prayers with priests. You remember only the sound of bells can save from drones, bell ringing.
At the Crimean Bridge, there are kilometer-long traffic jams with manual inspections taking up to 7 hours. The FSB is jamming communications and the internet. Russia is in a logistical dead end. This is no longer defense, this is an offensive. Ukraine strikes accurately, systematically, and effectively. We'll discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan right now.
Greetings, I wish everyone good health. Roman Grigorievich, the top events, the SBU special operation, the strike on Russia's nuclear aviation. We attacked more than 5 aircraft. Tell us more about this. On Monday, the security service, they have a special center there that deals with long-range strategic drones, attacked Saki. As we've discussed several times before about Saki, there's also Novofedorivka nearby, which is the main depot supporting Russia's naval aviation. But the aircraft themselves are stationed specifically in Saki, that is, it's a naval aviation airfield. Naturally, there are various Su-24s, Su-30s, and some helicopters present there, which, by the way, were specifically supposed to intercept these incoming drones, but regrettably couldn't. As Army aviation sometimes reports directly to President Putin, the commander simply couldn't accomplish it. There you have it. That's the kind of misfortune that happened 5 aircraft were hit, 1 destroyed, 1 out of the 5 was destroyed, a Su-30 completely, another Su-30 was damaged, and 3 Su-24s were also damaged. They really can also be carriers of nuclear weapons.
Roman Grigorievich, the SBU struck 5 fighter jets at the Saki airfield. A Su-30SM was destroyed, another one was damaged, and 3 Su-24s were destroyed. These are aircraft capable of carrying nuclear warheads. An aviation munitions depot was blown up, and Saki is Russia's key airbase on the Black Sea, and it has been put out of commission. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's nuclear threats and the 2 nuclear submarines that are approaching Russia or have already approached, is the fact that we are once again attacking nuclear-capable aircraft in occupied Crimea, an important signal overall.
The Su-30, Su-24, even the frontline bomber, these are tactical aircraft, but nevertheless, they can carry nuclear weapons. So in that case, this is a kind of parallel strike along with, at the very least, informational pressure on Russia from the United States. Why informational? Because, for example, in the information space, giving the order for 2 submarines to head toward the Russian coast, in reality, that doesn't really say much. Why? Because, first of all, some submarines are already near the Russian coast anyway. And submarines are like gophers. You can't see them, but they're there. And when, for example, Trump announces that 2 submarines are heading somewhere, they're actually not there anymore. In other words, they're already in position, already prepared. It's a way to apply pressure for certain decisions to be made, and also an attempt to rein in Medvedev's rhetoric. Lately, he's been having some issues with his tongue. It's gotten a bit too long. He needs a canning machine or a lip sealing machine or maybe a tongue sealing machine, or just have it cut off completely. So most likely Trump is trying to do this to pressure Putin into reining in Medvedev a bit, to have him trim Medvedev's tongue a little. Because joking about nuclear weapons the way Medvedev did, well, in quotes, joked, is absolutely unacceptable, especially with the Americans in this regard. They have a pretty serious number of nuclear warheads, about 5,500, and that's just the ones publicly known, plus delivery systems, including submarines. They have a sufficient number of missiles. A salvo from just 2 of those submarines that Trump mentioned would be enough for Russia to be forgotten for about 30 years. I mean, in principle, that's actually not a bad idea, by the way.
Is the attack on the Saki base a tactical or strategic failure for Russia? What does this mean for us? So in this way, we are demonstrating our strength, preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula because, well, it's been a long time since we've attacked airfields in Crimea this powerfully, and there haven't been such serious losses. What do you think?
Well, it's been a long time since we attacked not just airfields, but also oil refineries and oil depots. We haven't attacked them for almost half a year. So the big question is, what was this? Well, I think this is a question that will later be asked by investigators, those who will analyze the actions and inaction of our special services, including the armed forces of Ukraine. For almost half a year, there hasn't been a single oil refinery hit, basically since March. It's only in the last couple of days, or maybe 3 or 4 days, that they've been hitting a couple of oil refineries. But before that, there really weren't any. And it's the same situation with the airfields. That is, they tried to get to them. Well, there were a few strikes on airfields, to be fair. We remember the strike on Engels, for example. The SBU did a good job there. When they gather a sufficient number of drones, it can take them a long time to collect them. So after that, there's specific target designation and pretty good execution of the tasks, like this time. Saki is located in Crimea, that's Western Crimea. That is basically, well, it's southwestern Crimea. So essentially, from a targeting perspective, it's a pretty good and in principle easy target for us. Why is that? Because approaching from the sea allows you to take out a large number of military facilities. So the question, and you asked it correctly, is why hasn't it happened? Why hasn't it happened before? Because let's not get ahead of ourselves so we don't end up disappointed later. Let's not get too excited just yet. But if there is systematic work done on the Crimean airfields, there are 5 of them that the Russians use, then believe me, the Russians will lose at least 15 to 20% of their tactical and army aviation, including helicopters, which are also stationed there. Well, we'll see. We'll be asking Melyuk for an encore every day, so he keeps repeating it over and over.
Roman Grigorievich, there's a 30-kilometer traffic jam on the Kerch, or rather, the Crimean Bridge. What does that indicate? So as I understand it, there's a manual inspection taking 7 hours according to Crimean Wind. Russia is simply in some kind of logistical dead end.
Let me clarify a bit, if I may. The Crimean bridge is in Moscow, so if they have a traffic jam from Moscow to the Kerch bridge, believe me, that's not a 7-hour jam, that's a 770-hour jam. It's a very big question whether they'll even make it through. And the Kerch bridge, which right now, at this moment, well, it's not exactly closed, but there is very strict control over entry and exit at the moment. And now on entry, Russians are trying to somehow get there after the carpet regime, after the destruction of some aviation, more precisely aviation fuel storage facilities. They're trying to get to Crimea, some on foot, some by car, just trying to make it there. Naturally, this is causing a traffic jam, and I don't think the jam will clear up until September. It will just keep building up. They don't have any other options. Well, there is another option. They could go to the Caspian to relax, or to the Aral if it hasn't completely dried up yet.
Dear audience, please like this video. In the comments, write a few kind words to our duo, and also let us know where you're watching from and what you think about how the armed forces of Ukraine, the security service of Ukraine, and other special services are attacking occupied Crimea, military facilities, airfields, and enemy aircraft. Let's move on to block number 2, strikes on logistics and infrastructure. The strike on the Frolovo railway junction, the Arkada station, is on fire. What is happening with the railway junctions and logistics? I looked at the Voronezh and Rostov regions as well as the Moscow region. We are attacking railway junctions, military trains. They are burning, as are fuel tankers. Roman Grigorievich, the floor is yours.
Well, right now there are mainly 2 railway junctions that are very important to us, and stopping them, or at least slowing them down, is crucial. These are the Volgograd and Rostov junctions. And over the past 2 weeks, our defense forces' long-range strike capabilities have been able to reach exactly these 2 junctions. These are the right actions because most of the supplies go through them. Fuel goes through the Volgograd junction, and ammunition comes from Tatarstan, while equipment and vehicles come from the Urals. And then several chains converge at the Rostov railway junction. There, the flow is redistributed either to Melitopol, Tokmak, Mariupol, Berdyansk, Donetsk, Volnovakha, and also to Luhansk. All of this goes through Rostov, which is why it is very important for us now to stop the second wave, and it has already begun, the second wave of the Russian summer offensive, while it is still deep in the rear. Disabling traction substations, thermal power plants, balancing capacities, and high voltage power lines that supply the railway is extremely important for us. Why? Because even if there is a delay of just a few hours, the entire supply schedule gets disrupted. There are certain factors involved, such as loading, unloading, entering certain tracks, for example, and all of this gets disrupted for the Russians. And we can use long-range strikes, but they definitely need to be scaled up and carried out systematically, just like the strikes on oil refineries and airfields. And then, in principle, it would be possible to delay the advance of Russian troops by at least 30%.
Oil depots in Sochi have been hit. The airport is not operating at full capacity. Rosneft, massive explosions. Roman Grigorievich, we are now gradually starting to attack both oil depots and refineries in remote regions. To what extent is this currently a systematic strategy to destabilize the supply across all of Russia?
Well, right now, this systematic approach is visible. The main thing is not to abandon it. This has happened so many times already. Last year, our GUR, security services and drone forces started destroying the Russian oil industry, and then, as if by magic, in May, they stopped. This year, too, they started the destruction at the beginning of the year, made pretty good progress, and then stopped in March. So now, in principle, we could maintain the same pace. If we don't slow down, and if, as you rightly said, there is systematic action, then by the end of the year, we could eliminate at least a third, maybe even half of the Russian oil industry. Our long-range strike capabilities can, in principle, easily take out all Russian oil refineries plus oil terminals, and even the Druzhba pipeline, which runs 40 kilometers north of Semenovka. So we have this capability. The main thing is that it isn't stopped now. There have already been several strikes on that base in Sochi. Why are strikes being carried out specifically on this base? It's sort of a base, but actually it's the fuel and lubricants depot for the Sochi airfield. There's a large amount of aviation kerosene stored there, which is used to refuel Russian military aircraft, including helicopters that intercept our drones. So for us, this is purely a military target. The fact that they have military aircraft stationed at a civilian airfield is their problem, frankly speaking, but for us, it's a military target. Because as soon as the opportunity arises, that aviation kerosene is taken out of commission, although in reality it could be taken out of commission even at the refinery, since it doesn't just appear in the tanks out of thin air. Now, a tank holding 2,000 tons has been set on fire. That is, it's a significant fuel tank. It alone will take several months to restore, and God willing, a few more of them will burn through as well at the very least. So if the strikes don't stop, I'll say it again. By the end of the year, the Russians will have a major problem with fuel.
A strike on the gas distribution station in Kurgan, gas pipelines in Siberia, and the Moscow region heading towards Central Asia are under attack. These are the concerned citizens. Who is carrying this out, Roman Grigorievich, and how important are these strikes on the energy sector today, especially on gas? And again, could these strikes destabilize the supply to all of Central Russia right now?
Well, judging by the geography and the number of gas distribution stations destroyed recently, and these gas distribution stations are being destroyed near military facilities, meaning they either supply or are located on military sites, it's definitely the work of our concerned citizens. That's their job, because to be honest, you could set a gas distribution station on fire with just a match, and this stops an entire production cycle if it's a military production facility, or it disrupts the life support of a military site if it's some other kind of military facility, not directly involved in production, but still military nonetheless. That's why such actions will certainly be supported by us, and a big thank you to the concerned citizens who didn't mind using a single match to help ease the burden on the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian people by stopping the Russian hydrocarbon industry. It's actually a pretty good move. That's if we're talking about gas distribution stations. But when it comes to entire gas transit routes like the Turkmen gas you're mentioning now, in other words, the main gas pipelines, it's a more complicated operation to stop them. Still, I think it's possible. Again, it's our concerned citizens who know exactly what they're doing. I wouldn't rule out that these are already local residents because, well, this is from Turkmenistan through Kazakhstan. It's a pretty big, long pipeline. And in principle, any local resident could shut down an entire main gas pipeline. And that's why these concerned citizens are practically, you could say, our second army. And there are already at least hundreds, if not thousands, of these concerned citizens.
Roman Grigorievich, over the past 2 weeks, we've attacked the Leningrad region 3 times already. What is the target of these attacks? Because once again, Pulkovo airport was shut down and it was closed for quite a long time. There was the carpet plan, drone attacks. Previously, we didn't really attack the Leningrad region. It was mostly the Moscow region. If we're talking about major key cities in Russia, that's St. Petersburg and Moscow. And now, especially after the so-called celebration of the Russian Navy Day on Sunday when it took place, we've started actively attacking the Leningrad region.
Well, 1,000 kilometers. The thing is, that's quite a significant range. Even the fierce ones, like the same beavers, might simply not make it that far. So you need to send pretty serious devices there, almost at the level of an airplane. But nevertheless, as I understand it, we do have them, not in large numbers, admittedly, but we have them, and there is somewhere to go with them. Well, first of all, starting from Ust-Luga, that's a very specific and specialized terminal facility for the efficient transferring of various essential types of fuel, both natural gas and crude oil, and then ultimately ending with the significant Murmansk line. That's if we're talking about that direction, at least to the north. So there are enough military facilities there for our long-range units to reach. But these are already strategic drones, heavy drones. Well, in terms of the general number, the general classification of drones, heavy strategic drones for which 1,000 kilometers is not a long distance at all.
When we talk with you, we've also prepared another segment about the panic in Russia's rear areas. First of all, without a doubt, there are flight delays all over Russia, an aviation collapse that is costing Russia hundreds of millions of dollars. The FSB is jamming communications. A very important point is that regional governors are coming out and saying, right now, Russians, please bear with us for a bit. We'll be without communication, without internet. I read that already in 5 regions, 5 governors have made such statements. The FSB is holding a meeting. Putin is summoning the Minister of Transport for addressing down because logistics are being disrupted. Again, there are 30-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean bridge, inspections lasting up to 7 hours, and not just there. Flight delays, chaos is growing in the rear, and panic is spreading among civilians. Do you think we can call this a managed crisis in the rear of the Russian Federation? And how long can Russia withstand this level of chaos?
Well, it's unlikely that this is actually managed. In other words, this is an attempt to create chaos. And as for how to manage that chaos, the Russians will figure it out themselves, because in some areas they have competent leaders, and in others they have utterly clueless ones who sometimes even end up jumping out of windows, shouting and swearing, "Oh, why did you throw me out?" Nevertheless, everyone has seen this and understands perfectly well how the Russian special services handle these kinds of issues. So this chaos, which ultimately, at the very least, hits the Russian economy, because any, say, air transportation, freight, railway transportation, all operate on a certain schedule. If the schedule is disrupted in one place, it practically knocks out the entire profit-making mechanism along the whole chain, or at the very least, leads to losses as such. Therefore, this may not be our direct action, not a direct action per se, but rather a side effect, a collateral reaction that results from the use of our military drones against Russian military targets. And at the same time, of course, all Russian means of transportation are being halted for various reasons, one of which is at least presumably the infliction of damage. So in principle, if it's swaying, eventually it will sway enough and collapse. After all, the Russian Empire, the Russian Federation at this moment is a colossus with feet of clay. Russia's feet of clay are its economy. And as soon as the economy is undermined, this colossus will fall apart, just as the Soviet Union once did, for the very same reason, an economic one. So the more chaos there is, even if it's uncontrolled chaos, so be it. The main thing is that it leads to the collapse of the Russian Empire.
Roman Grigorievich, the USA, Trump, and nuclear signals. So we'll definitely discuss this with you again. Donald Trump has declared that US nuclear submarines are ready, and in general, he is prepared for nuclear war. This is a very serious statement. I don't know how much of it is just talk, because when Donald Trump makes such statements that the US is ready for nuclear war, what consequences should we expect after those words? Peskov responds, "There are no winners in a nuclear war." The Kremlin abruptly shifted its tone from threats to justifications. And here's the question, is this a political game or is it a real signal from the US? What should we be preparing for, and why has Moscow changed its rhetoric?
Well, the thing is, Medvedev went too far. We've already talked about this. Medvedev went too far, provoking Trump in this regard. And Trump got tired of it. He's so impulsive after all. Most likely he woke up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning and naturally drew his saber. He sent 2 submarines to the shores of Russia, though no one told him that they were already off the Russian coast. They just said, "Everyone go." They went to carry out a combat mission. After all, this is one of the main branches of the American nuclear triad, submarines. And naturally, just the movement itself in this direction puts pressure on Russia. It's clear that Medvedev has now been pushed under the baseboard somewhere. He won't be barking for the foreseeable future. But this whole situation definitely has to play out. That's why Peskov, Putin maybe, had to squirm a bit, but Peskov is the main one. Now, most likely this tired old horse will have to come out on stage. He'll also put in his 2 cents. I mean, Lavrov. So they'll play their part, calm Trump down regarding his actions toward Medvedev. Medvedev probably won't bring up nuclear weapons anymore, or he won't have a reason to, or at the very least, they'll explain to him that he shouldn't do it.
And in your considered opinion, how much of a significant deterrent is the United States Navy truly at this present point in time?
Well, the US does have the largest Navy, of course, but there are certain problems now, real problems. It needs to be modernized. It needs to be restructured in certain areas. Why? Because, well, everyone now clearly understands that drones, not just aerial, but also underwater and surface drones, are a major problem for any navy at all. And now navies all over the world will have to address this problem. And those who don't have a navy will be rubbing their hands together, thinking, oh, well, it's good we didn't invest in one, as it turns out. Once upon a time, some may remember Rakin when he had that interesting skit about dinosaurs. He said something like, "Where are those dinosaurs, those 6-story fools? They've disappeared over all this time, but the bedbug survived." So it's exactly the same situation here now. Now, all these 6-story fools, meaning the same fleet, they are a very good target for small, inexpensive means of destruction of various types. That's why they will either have to be completely rebuilt, for example, strengthening carrier groups with certain mechanisms, or, for instance, hidden away, just like the Russian Black Sea Fleet is doing now. They've simply gone into hiding. It's like these dinosaurs started behaving like little bugs. They've crawled under the baseboards in Novorossiysk and are sitting there quietly. They rarely come out, and even then it's mostly the submarines that try to fire off a few caliber missiles. That's it. So that's the kind of situation we're seeing now, and the United States, even with their formidable navy, will have to think about what to do with it. The only way to use the fleet, meaning the aircraft carrier fleet, is to have aircraft carriers that on the one hand can be seriously protected, even just by distance, and provide the opportunity for planes to take off or for missiles to carry out their combat missions. But this is the strategy that the Pentagon is now restructuring.
Roman Grigorievich, there's a very interesting idea here that appeared in the text. Information surfaced in the media space that this tsunami in Kamchatka, followed by the volcanic eruption in Kamchatka, but initially the tsunami was actually a test, and some believe it was an unsuccessful Russian test, while others say it was the Americans conducting tests. And accordingly, as a result, the tsunami in Kamchatka. Moreover, there was significant information indicating that a crucial pier, or perhaps something even more substantial than a mere pier at the Russian Federation's strategic nuclear submarine bases, was indeed hit. As a military analyst, how would you assess this information? How likely is it to be true?
Well, it's unlikely to be external interference. Highly unlikely. Why? Because first of all, Kamchatka is a fault zone. In other words, it's where tectonic plates overlap and it's a serious seismic area. You'd have to be completely brainless to build nuclear submarine bases there with nuclear weapons. Well, the Russians went a bit overboard with that. Not there anywhere else, but definitely not there. Serious earthquakes happen there. Naturally, tsunamis are one of the consequences of earthquakes as well as volcanic eruptions. So that's the general picture. And any external interference with seismic centers has already been mapped out. That's why it's unlikely to be some kind of external, specifically external pressure. But as for the same office, meaning God's office, it could have intervened, could have stepped in and put the Russians in their place a bit, because there's been too much sorrow lately, too many curses upon Russian heads. And in the end, yes, the Heavenly Office records all of this, and then some decision is made and the slab is moved, as they say. It's unlikely that the Americans...
Roman Grigorievich, for the finale, I've prepared an important topic: the new command of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. President Zelensky has appointed Anatoly Krivonosko as the new commander of the Air Force of Ukraine. Before this, he had served as acting commander for a year. There is a strengthening of the air component, especially air defense and drones. In your opinion, what will this appointment change now that it is de jure? Can we expect a tougher approach in the skies?
Well, the appointment is already, well, here it is, the person. First of all, the right decision was made a year ago. For about a year before this appointment, we kept saying that it was absolutely necessary to appoint a pilot as the head of the Air Force, that is, as the commander-in-chief.
Yes.
So they listened. Yes, they listened. Although it happened after we lost our heroic pilot in 2016. They listened, yes, replaced him, and again appointed an acting commander. And so over the course of a year, they observed how a pilot could handle the air defense system, and it was decided that indeed pilots can handle it. Moreover, now the air component is becoming the main focus even within the air defense system, not to mention certain offensive aspects. Therefore, naturally, after the decision was made, a real appointment was made, and a pilot was officially named as the commander-in-chief. Now, the question is about further actions. In other words, simply replacing the commander with a pilot, or rather appointing a pilot as commander-in-chief, is not enough. The entire system of our air forces needs to be restructured around the flight mission. That is, all the heads of the air command posts, all the managers along the chain of command, at least as far as the air forces are concerned, should be pilots. This is very important. So right now, at this moment, this is only half the job. At this point, it's half done. We need to see it through to the end and replace the entire chain of command in the air forces with flight personnel. Only then can we say that our air forces will be not only a serious defensive mechanism, but also a formidable offensive force, which is exactly what they should be, because it is precisely the air component that in the third millennium forms the main paradigm for conducting offensive operations.
Roman Grigorievich, should we expect our allies to eventually provide us with JASSM missiles, Taurus missiles, other types of missiles, and of course Tomahawks as the final step?
Well, Tomahawks are probably unlikely. After all, only Typhoons can be used as launch platforms for us, although a few Tomahawks could be used purely for intimidation, nothing more. But I'll repeat once again, to launch them here, we would need either submarines with torpedo tubes or vertical launch systems like the Mk-45 on submarines. There are such silos launch systems, or a ship-based Mk-41 launch system which has 64 silos, but that's from a ship. In other words, it's unlikely anyone would give us a ship and, for example, burying it here like they did in concrete in Romania and Poland. That's too lengthy a process just to launch Tomahawks. So that leaves just one option, the Typhoon launches, or sometimes called Typhon, depending on the translation. Now, there aren't that many Typhoon launchers to begin with, and theoretically, purely in theory, they could, of course, give us Tomahawks. But again, I'll repeat, that would be purely as a deterrent. Here, there's still more hope for our own ballistic missiles. We are capable of producing them. The question for the authorities is, where has it been for the past 7 years? But for example, when it comes to JASSMs and Taurus missiles, there is definitely more hope here because the F-16s themselves are carriers of cruise missiles. And the main thing, at least at this stage, given the realities of the enemy's strong air defense and their sufficient number of SAM systems and aircraft, the optimal use of the F-16 is precisely as a launch platform for JASSMs. JASSM missiles have a range from 370 to 980 kilometers. So again, logic suggests that we should be getting them. So at the very least, we'll just have to wait for them. We'll see what happens with Trump, depending on which side of the bed he gets up on, because when it comes to the JASSM issue, it's definitely Trump who has to make the decision. Well, or it will happen if it happens. And as for the Taurus missiles, that's a question for Merz and Germany, of course. But again, there's an American connection there. Why? Because the Taurus is a missile that flies at extremely low altitudes, and it absolutely relies on a so-called digital terrain map, which at the moment only the Americans have. So without transferring the digital terrain map, this missile would be an easy target at higher altitudes and would not accomplish its combat mission. So once again, everything is tied to the Americans in every respect. Therefore, we'll wait for Trump to get up on the wrong side of the bed.
Dear audience, please like this video and leave a few kind words for our duo in the comments. Roman Grigorievich and I work together several times a week, definitely more than 3 shows. In the comments, let us know where you're watching from, share the geography of our viewers, and write a few warm words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine and well-known military analysts. Roman Svetan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as usual, see you again on Wednesday.
Goodbye.